Two young men are running from East to West Berlin. To get to the west, they must climb over a wall. To stop them, their own government is shooting to kill. August 1961. A wall is built, separating the people of East and West Berlin. East Berliners will go to any lengths to get free. They will trick their way past border checkpoints by hiding in trucks and cars. They will swim across freezing canals and rivers. They will even fly planes over the wall to airlift an escapee out. The barrier that provoked this courageous and inventive behavior was built right through Berlin. Two walls contain a zone stripped of all cover. It is the death strip, where people are shot if they are seen. The first victim is Gunther Litvin. He dies just 11 days after the city is divided.
Until that time, not a single shot had been fired at the Berlin Wall. The shoot-to-kill policy began with my brother's death.
Many more died before the wall fell. The death strip ran for 28 miles through the city. Over 300 guard towers kept a 24-hour watch on the barrier. The wall was continually being improved and upgraded, and obstacles added to prevent escape. Today, the Berlin Wall has all but vanished. All that remains is a line of cobblestones marking its route. Christopher Hilton is a British author who has studied the impact of the wall since first seeing it as a tourist in 1970. He regularly returns to Berlin to continue his research into this extraordinary episode in history.
The exact point where communism and capitalism confronted each other like two great tectonic plates was a white line drawn in the middle of the road at Checkpoint Charlie, painted by a border guard called Hagen Koch.
In 1961, Hagen Koch helped build the wall. Today, he collects all he can on the barrier, even to the last passport stamp used by the East German state in 1989. The wall split Berlin into two hostile worlds, East and West. But how? The answer lies in the final days of World War II. Europe, 1945. The Soviet Red Army attacked Germany from the east, American, British, and French forces from the west. Berlin was surrounded by the Red Army. The Soviets shot their way into the center of Berlin. The war in Europe ended with the raising of the red flag on Germany's parliament building in the center of Berlin, the Reichstag. The victorious powers divided the defeated Germany into four parts, ruled by their armed forces. The American, British, and French sectors would develop into West Germany, the Soviet zone into a separate and hostile East Germany. Berlin was left 90 miles within East German territory. Before the wall was built, Berlin was divided into four sectors, 3 occupied by Western troops, 1 by the Soviets.
Berlin remained until 1961 very much a single city, although divided in theoretical lines, only theoretical lines, with the Soviets and the East Germans running one part and the West running the other. The underground system was connected, the bus system was connected, the phone system was connected, the sewerage system was connected, the tram lines were connected. It was just one city, and it was unthinkable it could be divided. West Berlin was heavily subsidized by the West and prosperous. East Germany had to pay war reparations to the Soviets and was therefore very poor. So the two standards of living were wildly different on either side of the same street. And as a consequence, the East Germans began to just walk across and emigrate to the West, which wanted skilled East German workers. And East Germany began to hemorrhage at the rate of a small town a year. Well, if you've only got 19 million to start with, you know where the logic of that's going to go. It's going to go to oblivion.
To stop the hemorrhage of its own citizens, the East German government barred the way west. Troops were deployed on Sunday, August 13th, 1961. They stood, literally shoulder to shoulder, dividing the city.
People couldn't understand that this was going to be a permanent division of their city, and they really wouldn't be able to walk across the street to see their mother anymore.
It took a few weeks for a wall to be built right through Berlin. Until then, barbed wire formed the barrier. People who braved the wire could still escape. A small apartment in Berlin houses an amazing collection of information about the wall. It is Hagen Koch's archive. It gives an extremely detailed insight into the East German regime's attitude to the barrier. Hagen recalls how he was ordered to survey the new border installations.
I
was 21 years old and in the border guards. On the 15th of August, I went through the city with a map, recording everything. In the afternoon, I reached Checkpoint Charlie. On the western side, people were protesting, throwing stones and bottles. So I was ordered to paint a very thick white line across the road at Checkpoint Charlie, to indicate to the Westerners, you can go this far, but not further. At the time, I believed the wall would be a good thing and prevent my country, East Germany, being drawn into World War III.
Despite these hazards, smoke and tear gas bombs sometimes...
As West Berliners realized their city had been cut in two overnight, tensions rose and violence increased. In the early days of the wall, there were still weak points. There was even an apartment building in Bernaustrasse where people could walk into their front doors from the east, then jump out their windows into the west.
East Berliners who have apartments facing the border take the long chance when they get orders to leave their homes for the interior. While an East German guard attempts to yank her back to prison, West Berliners pull her to a fire net and freedom.
The windows in Bernaustrasse were bricked up. Soon it too would be demolished. The first crudely built wall was about 6 feet high. Watchtowers now rose in East Berlin. The idea was that nobody could move without being seen by the border guards. So the wall was not impregnable. The East German authorities responded ruthlessly.
In diesen Analysen wird festgestellt,
these documents show how every single escape attempt was closely analyzed. It was found that escapes were increasing, so it was decided that weapons must be used to prevent them. And so we started shooting at escapees. And this is a report recording weapons fired during escape attempts between the 13th and the 31st of August. It records that there are 3 warning shots, 1 targeted shot, and the result is 1 dead person, Günter Litvin. He tried to escape at a canal basin. Here is the railroad bridge. This is where the guards were stationed. This is Litvin's escape route, and from about 40 yards away, the lethal shots were fired.
Gunther Litvin did not know the guards had been ordered to shoot. His brother Jürgen visits the scene of Gunther's death. Gunther was the first escapee to be shot trying to get to West Berlin, just on the other side of the canal.
As my brother stepped up to the edge of the canal on the eastern side, the border guards shouted at him to halt, or they would shoot. Startled, my brother jumped into the water, so the guards opened fire. That stopped him swimming. He tried to dive under the water a couple of times, but that didn't work, so he put his hands up and was shot in the neck. The East German government didn't tell us that my brother had been killed. We saw it on West German TV. They announced that the first person had been shot at the wall and that his name was Günther Litvin. The next day, I went to the coroner's office to see if what had been reported on West German TV was true. They refused to let me see my brother to identify him.
Man zeigte mir den Bruder nicht, ihn zu identifizieren, sondern sagte noch, wenn ihr sagt...
They insisted the coffin would have to remain sealed for the funeral. At his funeral at the end of August, I managed to get into the basement of the little chapel where they kept the bodies and broke the coffin open with a crowbar. I wanted to see if my brother had been shot so badly that he was unrecognizable. My brother was in his coffin with a band-aid on his chin where the bullet had come out and a wound in his neck. I put some small flowers in his hands and closed the coffin. Then the funeral took place.
Gunther Litvin's death was not widely publicized, but a few months later, another shooting would happen in the full glare of worldwide publicity. The victim this time was a teenager named Peter Fechter.
There was what I believe was a defining moment when two young men from the east tried to get across quite near Checkpoint Charlie in 1962. One got across and the other was shot down, a young man called Peter Fechter, against the wall and was left to bleed to death.
The civilized world cried shame when East German guards shot a fleeing teenager and then left him to die. They removed his body, but they will never remove him as a symbol to the angered Germans. They vented their wrath on buses carrying Russian guards to a Soviet war memorial and turned to the West Berlin Freedom Bell to voice their unity as a people.
Because it was so near to Checkpoint Charlie, West Berlin policemen and American soldiers came along. Of course, they were not allowed to go into the east. They were not allowed to climb over the wall. So what they tried to do was drop first aid kits over to him as he lay there. The East Berlin border guard were frightened to go near Fechter in case the West Berliners started to shoot at them. So he was left until the East German army could be summoned, and that took 30 or 40 minutes. He kept murmuring, "Why don't you help me? Why don't you help me?" And nobody could. And this was the moment where everybody knew the truth about the war. They really would shoot to kill, and that changed everything.
East Germany's leader, Walter Ulbricht, was now presented with a problem. The killing of Peter Fechter could not be covered up, so Ulbricht decided to celebrate it.
Mit dem Tod von Peter Fechter.
With the death of Peter Fechter, a name and a face can be put to the victims of the war. Fechter's death is heard about worldwide. This makes its mark on the border guards. So in the fall of 1962, the East German leader, Walter Ulbricht, presents this flag of honor to the 33rd Border Regiment to commend them for the death of Peter Fechter.
Auch der Tod von Peter Fechter. Richtig ist, dass die Grenzsoldaten keine Skrupel haben.
To counter the guards' uneasiness, Ulbricht has the commemorative flag made with his own portrait on it.
Auf der sein eigenes Porträt drauf ist.
This was his way of indoctrinating the guards to continue using their weapons to stop escapees.
damit sie mit ihrer Waffe weiter an dieser Grenze Gebrauch machen, Fluchten zu verhindern.
Every border guard had to deal with this reality. Roland Eggersdorfer monitored the border from a watchtower like this one. He was a border guard at age 19.
Der Kampfauftrag hieß ja, Grenzverletzer festzunehmen.
The combat mission was either to arrest or destroy. Everyone was aware of that at all times. So what would one have done? Looking back, I would have shot. This is how we were educated. We were taught that those wanting to escape were all criminals. The greatest fear? Whenever we went back to the barracks after duty, we said, "Thank God, I didn't have to shoot." Or "Thank God, no special incidents in my section." The border guards didn't want to have to shoot. The guards started thinking, what else can I build into this wall? Alarms, telephone installations, public address systems. All these ideas were developed by the guards themselves, and their ideas were presented to the Minister for National Defense. He looked at them and said, "Good, we can do that." Or, "No good, we can't do that."
The wall rapidly evolved. Many buildings close to it were demolished, and the wall was fortified with a hinterland fence, usually about 150 feet behind it. The space between became the death strip. To avoid the border guards altogether, groups of students started tunneling under the death strip. It was not easy, as tunnel organizer Hasso Herschel recalls.
It is quite difficult to do, because the tunnel requires a certain depth. It has to go under building foundations and below the sewer system, 12 to 18 feet deep. You could only do that with the help of a lot of people. Around 48 worked on our tunnel. There was a core of about 8 to 12, but we always had the support of other students.
More than one tunnel was dug. Tunneling was such a large undertaking that some individuals specialized in raising money. Men such as Wolfgang Kochrow, who started fundraising by approaching a ministry in the West German government.
I could help with 30,000 marks, and this money I get from the Ministry of Family and Refugee. Then we need money for technical things, for electric lines. They need gas mask, they need police blue flashlights, walkie-talkies, and so on. The tunnel was 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. 10 students live there in the tunnel for 1 week or 10 days, sleeping there, eating there, working there.
Lookouts were posted, and the comings and goings of tunnelers minimized to avoid arousing suspicion.
The tunnel was open for 2 nights, and at least 57 people came through the tunnel, and so the name Tunnel 57.
All the tunnels under the wall followed the same pattern. They were dug from West Berlin to the east, because nobody could have kept tunnel building secret in the heavily patrolled border areas of East Berlin. And after the initial hole was dug, they headed upwards to make the job of bringing out the spoil easier by creating a downhill run for it. Hasso Herschel worked on Tunnel 29.
We had started digging in the west in the premises of an old empty factory. The basements were big and were no longer being used. There was only one entrance. The owner handed us the keys and said, "Go ahead, guys, I know nothing."
Ich weiß von nichts.
When we started the tunnel, we ran into various small difficulties, with getting rid of the debris as well as with the air supply. But the further we got, the worse it became. The problems quadrupled. In order to have sufficient air, we bought a pump and sucked in fresh air from the outside through stovepipes. Each pipe was about 3 feet long and we put them together, one to another, as we got further.
The pumps were financed by NBC Television in return for film rights. The tunnel needed a steady supply of oxygen. It was over 400 feet long. It would take over 6 months to dig. The tunnel broke through into the courtyard of this building. The border guards did not intervene, and escapers started to emerge into the west. 29 people crawled through the tunnel to freedom.
The most important thing was my sister, my brother-in-law and my niece, who was a year old at that time. I had promised that I would try absolutely everything to get them across.
Once the friends and relatives of the tunnelers had made it through, they sealed Tunnel 29. But even as the last people climbed out, the East German government was developing new machines to find tunnels under the wall.
Das Interessante ist ja, in dieser Bernauer Straße hat es Anfang der 60er.
The interesting thing is that in Bernauer Straße at the beginning of the 1960s there were tunnels. And these documents contain the order that a searching device for tunnels should be developed, capable of finding holes and cavities in the ground.
Die mit der Aufgabe, die Aufklärung von Tunnelanlagen und anderen Hohlräumen, diese werden nicht.
Such a machine was never put into service. Tunneling stopped in the middle of the 1960s because the death strip was constantly being widened. So they had to dig increasingly long tunnels.
From about 1965, the wall's fortifications took on a more permanent air. Beside the newly widened death strip, a concrete wall replaced the hinterland fence. A new electrified signal fence alerted guards to any breakthroughs. Anti-vehicle traps were installed, and wooden watchtowers replaced with concrete ones, each with 360-degree views of the death strip. So that guards could rush to the site of any escape attempt, a patrol road ran the entire length of the barrier. A strip of sand was laid to betray the footprints of escapees. An anti-vehicle ditch guarded the western wall, which was heightened and topped with piping that was hard to grip. Floodlights lit up the wall, which not only divided the city but also ran 100 miles around West Berlin to seal it off from East Germany. Running across the death strip was an impossibility. Escapees would need to find other ways out. Hartmut Richter was born in East Germany in 1948.
Teachers told us, you live in the first state where workers, farmers, built the state, and it's the best German state, nicht? And so, I believe.
As a child, Hartmut had been well indoctrinated by the East German regime. But today, at the monument to the wall in Bernauer Straße, he teaches young people a very different story from the one he was taught at school.
Um auch das zu verhindern, waren die Türme so konzipiert gebaut, dass man also auch jederzeit in den Himmel leuchten konnte.
Hartmut soon realized the wall was built not to defend East Germany against the West, as his teachers told him. It was designed to keep East Germans in.
There was music too, nicht? I liked to hear the Beatles, the Stones, Beach Boys, and so, and we hair grow,
Determined to escape, Hartmut decided to cross the border where the wall could not run, where a canal ran between East and West Berlin. He would have to swim 1,000 yards. It would take him 4 hours. Hartmut was at his most vulnerable when he had to climb over a submerged barrier. He managed to avoid detection.
They didn't see me. I swam to the left side of the bank, and I read, "You are leaving the American sector." In German, Sie verlassen jetzt West-Berlin. I moved to the checkpoint, any meters behind. I saw a West German car. There was a lady inside, and I looked at and asked, "Where do you know where I am in West Berlin?" And they looked, and "Yeah, sure, you are West Berlin." You're from was very happy. The old lady too, saw me there.
As the years passed, it became possible for West German citizens to visit the East. With growing traffic between West and East Germany, the guards could not search every car. Now a West German, Hartmut could travel into East Berlin and smuggle people out.
It was not so difficult. It wasn't easy, but it was not so difficult. It was a great thing for me, nicht to help people out there to escape.
But the authorities noticed that every time Hartmut visited, an East German vanished. On his 31st trip, the guards were ready for him. They discovered Hartmut's sister hiding in the trunk. They were both arrested. Hartmut was sentenced to 15 years. He was sent to this Berlin prison.
The East Germans valued Western currency very, very highly, hard currency, and they discovered a very lucrative way of getting their hands on it, which was by essentially selling people who tried to escape and selling what we would call political prisoners, people who'd asked to leave East Germany, simply selling them to the West German government.
Until they got the cash, the East Germans kept their prisoners. 34,000 East Germans were ransomed by the West. In Hartmut's case, the bill came to $50,000.
They bought me free in November 1980. So I was 5 years and 7 months in jail.
The East German government hammered home the message that the border guards were defending their fatherland and socialism.
Once a month, the soldiers had political instruction classes where we were taught specifically that the enemy was West Germany, West Berlin, that criminals lived there who were primarily engaged in trying to harm East Germany. That's what we heard all day long. This is what we were taught, and everyone believed it. It was all about the big fight. That is what everything came down to. Socialism versus capitalism.
Other young men patrolled the wall, just a few yards away but a world apart. The U.S. Army maintained a daily wall patrol to assert their rights in Berlin, just as the Russians, the British, and the French did. The presence of communist and NATO troops just a few feet apart made Berlin a potential flashpoint throughout the Cold War. East Germany claimed the barrier prevented invasion from the West, but the anti-vehicle ditch faced east, embarrassingly the wrong direction. So in 1975, East Germany invested in a new wall. Watchtowers were replaced with ones that didn't sway in high winds. But more important, anti-vehicle obstacles could be removed, and the anti-vehicle ditch filled in because of the design of the new wall segments.
Von diesen Winkelementen sind es insgesamt 45,000
of these segments were produced. Each one of these segments cost about $150.
59 Mark für die Grenzanlagen. Durch
This new wall allowed the border guards to remove the anti-vehicle ditch. The new segments fulfilled the same function as the ditch barrier, because their anchored construction prevented vehicles from trying to ram through the wall. It would not topple. Each prefabricated segment was then smoothly joined together and often brightly painted by artists on the western side.
In fact, the wall became a tourist attraction. That saved 4 escapees, one of them 3 months pregnant, from being shot. A Western tourist videoed them swimming across the Spree, right in the center of Berlin. The border guards in their patrol boat did not dare open fire, for fear of hitting Western tourists. Getting over the walls safely now demanded a very high level of invention. Ingo Bethke, on the left, escaped in the 1970s while working as a border guard. His younger brother, Holger, was still in the east. The brothers picked a spot where the wall ran right down the middle of a street. West Berlin was just across the road from East Berlin. Holger and a friend had a plan that included firing an arrow over the wall. Ingo would be ready to pick the arrow up on a West Berlin rooftop.
Ja, wir hatten praktisch eine Angelsehne eine Sektflasche.
We had spooled a fishing line around a champagne bottle.
Und hat so praktisch, also nicht sondern mein Kumpel hatte die
And my friend held the bottle's neck.
Also ja, am Flaschenhals,
ja, am Flaschenhals,
am Flaschenhals und
and I shot. One end of the fishing line was attached to the arrow, and the other was here. It spooled off from the bottle, and we managed to cover a long distance with it.
Damit haben wir eben gute Reichweiten erzielt.
The fishing line was attached to a steel cable.
In dieses Stahlseil hatten wir dann so vorgefertigte
We hung from the steel cable on small pulleys, which we had prepared beforehand.
Und, ja,
I went first, and 2 or 3 minutes later my friend came after me.
Danach.
Ingo and Holger had both escaped. Now they planned to exploit a vast Soviet war memorial in East Berlin to rescue the youngest brother, Ecki. The year was 1989. This would be one of the last escapes, and surely one of the most ingenious and daring.
We already had our first ideas about how to get Ecki out 5 years before we actually flew.
One morning, Ingo and Holger took off into the dawn sky of West Berlin at the controls of 2 ultralight airplanes. Each plane carried a video camera to record the adventure. Their mission? To fly over the wall and rescue Ecki.
We all had walkie-talkies, but the problem was we couldn't get into contact. Maybe the distance was too great, or there were too many obstacles between us. We simply weren't able to get a radio connection. I just had to be there each time, hoping they would come.
Ecki's call sign was Erdl Dördel.
I heard the famous Erdl Dördel only when both of them were already in the air.
The wall lay ahead, East Berlin the other side of it.
Everything's okay.
They came over the trees. I was so excited and asked if I was meant to come out, but Ingo said, not yet.
Holger circled while Ingo brought his airplane into land.
I was so afraid the police would arrive, that someone had seen me or followed me. I was more nervous than Ingo. He kept his cool. It all happened so fast. We got over the trees okay. Holger had stayed up in the air, and now he flew behind us.
We had never tried flying over a city before, just over forests. Finding your way around is really quite different. We knew we had to keep going along the wall, and there would be the Reichstag, with a beautiful lawn in front.
The three brothers were heading for the distinctive Reichstag, Germany's parliament building. The lawn surrounding the Reichstag would be the brothers' landing strip. After 16 minutes in the air, the flight was over.
We landed at the Reichstag, and I was so happy. I got out of the plane, which wasn't actually more than a seat, a flying chair. I got down on my knees and kissed the ground and said, I don't believe it. We did it.
Ingo and Holger got Ecke out in 1989. The party was celebrating 40 years in power. Erich Honecker had replaced Walter Ulbricht as party leader. Honecker had been responsible for implementing Walter Ulbricht's decision to build the wall. Now he declared it would last another 100 years.
I always thought the wall will not fall. I saw for myself how well it was made, how it was constantly being perfected. For me it was clear, Honecker was right. It will last another 100 years and longer.
But Hungary, one of East Germany's partners in communist Eastern Europe, was dismantling its Cold War barriers to the West. The Iron Curtain was disappearing fast. East Germans had always had the right to travel to other Eastern Bloc communist states. Now they could go around the wall by traveling through Czechoslovakia, onto Hungary, and walking across what had become an open border to Austria, into the West and freedom.
And East Germany then sealed its border with Czechoslovakia. It essentially isolated itself from the 20th century. And this emboldened the people who'd never been bold before. And the moment they started to think and act for themselves, the regime essentially was finished. The ultimate irony was that in a state run by total bureaucracy, it was a bureaucratic error that defeated it and destroyed it in the end. And the error came about like this. The East German head of government sensed that to head off the rising tide of dissent, he would open the wall to let people out. But this would be properly regulated. You'd have to go to a police station, get a visa stamp, permission. And he gave it to a man called Günter Schabowski, who was a Politburo member, and said, at your nightly press conference, announce this. And Schabowski did not look at it because he was in a hurry. And at the end of the press conference, he said, oh, and by the way, there's some new travel regulations.
Also Privatreisen nach dem Ausland können ohne Vorliegen.
And he reeled them out that in future East Germans would be allowed to travel. And an Italian journalist said, when? And Schabowski said, oh. And he fumbled to look for this piece of paper he hadn't read and looked at it and said, as far as I know, immediately.
This is a historic night. The East German government has now declared that East German citizens can pass through the wall beginning tomorrow morning, no restrictions.
Harald Jäger was in charge of the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint. He heard the news while eating his evening meal.
Es ließ mir praktisch der letzten Bissen im Hals stecken.
I almost choked on my food. I left the canteen to consult with my superior and to get him to explain to me what was going on and what precisely it would mean for us.
What it meant was that East Berliners who would watch the press conference live on television started to mass at the checkpoints, first in tens, then hundreds, then thousands.
My superior called me once more and repeated that only those citizens who behaved provocatively were allowed to leave. Of course, these Germans who were there noticed that some people were being allowed to cross the border and others not, that we held some people back. For this reason, the situation got worse, and some people did become aggressive. That's when I decided to let my colleagues open the barrier and let everybody cross. Accordingly, the barriers were raised around 10:30, 10:15 p.m. No further controls were made, and East Germans literally flooded into West Berlin.
As East Berliners headed west, the wall peckers started dismantling the wall.
East Berliners can come to West Berlin, and West Berliners can go to East Berlin without visas.
Once the wall was broken, the regime that built and maintained it could not survive for long. For a time, the East German government maintained a ghostly half-life, stamping people's passports as they passed through holes in the wall. But in less than a year, East Germany disappeared. Berliners from east and west gathered at the heart of their city to celebrate the unification of Germany. Berlin was divided no longer. Nobody knows precisely how many died trying to escape East Berlin, but the wall claimed well over 100 lives. In Berlin, parts of the death strip remain, now looking like patches of waste land. All that remains of the construction today is the Border Guard's patrol road. Berliners ride their bikes and walk their dogs along it.
Here we are, a decade and more on from the fall of the wall. There are still two distinct societies there. They're feeling a path towards each other. They're getting over 28 years of differences. Many in the East still defend the wall. They felt that they were trying to create socialism, to get rid of obscene riches, to take fear and poverty out of everybody's life. It was a wonderful ideal. They felt only having a wall would allow them to try it. And it went horribly, horribly wrong.